Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. We're going to keep reading from our fiqh book, al-Ajubatu al-Jaliya fil al-Ahkam al-Hanbaliya, or the clear answer in Hanbali Rulings by a Shaykh Musa bin Issa, al-Qaddoomi, rahimahullah. This is going to be lesson number 37, where inshallah we will finish discussing about al-Janaiz, or the funerals, and we will cover the funeral prayer and carrying the deceased to the grave and some other rulings related to graves. So let us begin. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا بما ينفعنا وزدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين. قال المؤلف رحمه الله نفع الله به وبعلومه وعلوم مشايخنا في الدارين آمين. And just quickly, we're on page 103 of our Sheikh Khalid Shah translation. And I want to say in the last lesson, we forgot to read what's in this book because we were mainly focusing on Sharh of Daleel, Nayl al-Marib, on Daleel al-Talib. So we'll just read this part and then continue to the new sections. So the author, rahimahullah, he says, number 80, what are the rulings of the deceased? And he replies, there are 5 things that are wajib or obligatory to be done for the dead: bathing him, al-ghusl, shrouding, al-kafan, salat or the prayer of Janaza for him, carrying the body, and burial. It is sunnah to shroud a man in 3 white cotton wraps, and a woman in 5. A child is wrapped in 1 sheet, and a small girl in 3. So we've covered all these in the last dars, in the last lesson, and in quite a bit of detail. And if you recall, we even started with some of the manners as far as visiting the one who is sick and dying, and what should be done when one is dying, whether you are the one present or the one who is dying. And then we discussed about washing the body of the deceased and wrapping him or her. And one thing to add, which I don't think I mentioned in the last dars, but just as a benefit and to train our minds, in case we've forgotten, washing a corpse or part of it is among the invalidators of al-wudu. We covered this earlier, so if you want to just review and refresh, please go back to that lesson on the invalidators of wudu. But we did specify this is the person who's actually washing, not the person, for example, who would maybe be pouring the water for the person who's doing the washing. So that's just something to link with a previous lesson, and I encourage you to continually review. It's going to help your study in fiqh, and we all need review. Even our sheikhs, usually if they haven't memorized books, at least they spend a certain time of each year reviewing a book. It's even said the great Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, he read the book al-Wajiz 400 times. So it's by reviewing and memorizing where we can really build ourselves and our capacity So I encourage you to keep doing that. If you have this book, please try to review and read. I know we're giving a lot of extra sharh, explanation, but at least you can go back and read the core text, and if you find these durus beneficial, you can always go back on the things you want more information in, and just review with the videos online, inshallah. So the author goes on, question 81, how many prerequisites are there for salat or prayer upon the deceased? And he answers, there are 8 prerequisites for the salat upon the deceased. A, the intention. B, to be legally obligated, meaning to pray. C, facing the qibla. D, covering the awra. E, avoiding najasa. F, the deceased to be in front of the worshipper. This is during the prayer. G, the deceased to be Muslim. And H, both the deceased and the worshipper to be tahir, so in the state of ritual purity. So now we will look at some of what a-Taghlabi has mentioned. So the Janaza or funeral prayer, it is a fard kafaya, and this means it's a communal obligation. If part of the community performs it, they will cover for those who do not perform it. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Sallu ala man qala la ilaha illallah. So pray upon the one who says la ilaha illallah. And that's how we deduce that it is an obligation. But as we said, it's generally a communal obligation, but for the person who knows the deceased, and these are the people from among the Muslims who know the deceased, it's actually an obligation for them to perform the funeral prayer, and the person who does not know the deceased is excused from doing so. So even a single person performing this prayer can cover that obligation that we've discussed. Of course, the person should be a mukallaf or legally responsible, and it's not a condition that, for example, they be male. And the same applies for the washing of the deceased, the wrapping of him, and the burial of that person. So, as we mentioned, there are 8 conditions for this prayer. Several of them overlap with the regular prayer, such as the niyyah, facing the qibla, covering the awra, removing any najasa from the body or the area of the prayer, and the purity, ritual purity, we can say, of both the ones praying and the one being prayed upon. And that purity, even for this funeral prayer, Salat al-Janaza, can be achieved even through a tayammum, if there's an excuse to do so. Of course, the people praying should also be of legal responsibility, at least one person, so they cover that communal obligation that we've described, and of course they should be a Muslim. Likewise, the one being prayed over should also be a Muslim. So of course, unlike the regular prayer, maybe the condition that is different has to do with the deceased being present. meaning in front of those who are praying. So it would not be considered a valid prayer were, for example, the deceased to be behind the wall. I mean, even if they're in the same building, but they're behind the wall, that would not be counted as them being present. The one exception of this would be the Salat al-Janaza al-Ghaib, so the person who is being prayed upon, but they are not there, basically meaning that you're praying upon them and you and that person are in faraway locations. It's not just like you're in the same town but you don't feel like going to the prayer. No, I mean you're physically in a faraway place, but we will discuss this later on, inshallah. So the author continues, 82. How many arkan or pillars does Salat of Janaza have? And he replies, there are 7 arkan of Salat of Janaza. A. To stand for the fard, meaning of the Janaza prayer. This is for the first Salah of the Janaza. And then in parentheses, if there are multiple ones. B. 4 takbirs. C. Reading al-Fatiha. D. Salat on the Prophet, so sending the prayers upon the Prophet. E. To pray for the deceased, and the minimum of which can be said is Allahumma ghfir lahu warhamah. O Allah, forgive him and have mercy upon him. F. To do salam, so to say assalamu alaikum at the end, and this would be done 1 time. And G. To do the arkan in order, so to perform all of these pillars in the order that we've mentioned here. Now once again, if we look at the Sharh of Daleel, he does mention something beneficial here. These are being called arkan here, but in the book Muntaha al-Iradat, they are called the wajibat, but they have the same meaning. So as for the first pillar, we said it's standing. Of course, this applies for the one who's able to stand, just as in the fard prayer. And this standing for the one who's able to stand should be done in the fard of the Janaza. And as we already explained, it's just being repeated here, but the fard of the Janaza means the first Janaza that takes place. So for that first Janaza prayer, one cannot pray it while sitting down, nor on a mount, or we might say in modern times some type of a vehicle for transport, unless there is an excuse to do so. So the second pillar is the 4 takbirs, and this means saying the takbir. We're not talking about raising the hands, but the saying of the takbir, just like in the regular prayer, but here we have 4 times. Then number 3 is reading al-Fatiha. So this is just as in the obligatory prayer, but it is sunnah to read it in a silent way, even if it's at night, meaning those times, where we would normally read audibly. And number 4, sending prayers upon the Prophet. This will be done 1 time, which we will soon describe when we describe the funeral prayer. 5, making the supplication for the deceased, and we've mentioned what would be the minimum obligatory to achieve that. as we said, Allahumma ighfir lahu warhamhu. And then saying Assalamu alaikum at the end of the prayer, and this would be done just one time. And then finally we've mentioned the order which we've mentioned. And I think, inshallah, everyone has experienced the funeral prayer before, but I mean, just in case you didn't do it or you haven't picked it up here, I mean, this is a prayer where you're standing the whole time, meaning there's no ruku' or sujood. So regarding the order, a-Taghlabi says it's specified that the recitation, meaning of al-Fatiha, has to be in the first part of the prayer. We wouldn't call it rak'ah because there's no ruku', but after we can say the first opening takbir. Then in the second part, one would send the prayers upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he says, one would normally then in the third part be reading the dua or the supplication for the deceased, but that one is not specified. So technically one could even do it in the fourth part. But that's not the best order, and you'll see when we get to the description of the prayer now how it will, or how it should be in its superior form. So now the author continues, 83. What is the complete description of the Janaza Salah? The description of the Janaza Salah is: A, for the Imam to stand in the middle of a female and at the chest of a male. B, make the first takbir. C, say ta'awud, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. D, say the Bismillah. E, read the al-Fatiha. F, say the second takbir and then read the Salat al-Ibrahimiyya on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is like the Salat al-Ibrahimiyya that's at the end of the Fard prayer. G, do a third takbir and then make dua for the deceased. And H, do a fourth takbir and then pause briefly and then do salam, meaning one salam on the right side. So as we said, the Imam, he will be standing in front of the chest of a man. We're talking about the deceased person. If it's a man who's deceased, he'll be standing in front of the chest, and if it's a woman who's deceased, he'll be standing in the middle of her. I mean, as far as aligned to her. And then if it's a hermaphrodite, it will be somewhere in between the chest and the middle. Then he will make the intention. The intention should be to perform this Salat al-Janaza. Then he will make the first takbir and put his right hand on his left hand, just as in the regular prayer. Then he will read the ta'awud, saying a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, and then the bismillahir rahmanir rahim. But it's important to note that unlike the normal prayer, we don't read the opening dua. Just after the ta'awud and the basmalah, we go directly into al-Fatiha. Then when al-Fatiha is completed, one does another takbir, saying Allahu Akbar, and then they will return the hands as they were before, and then they will send prayers upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and one does just like they do at the end of the prayer or the Salat al-Ibrahimiyya. Then after that there is another takbir saying Allahu Akbar, and then one supplicates for the deceased. And what a-Taghlabi mentions in his Sharh is even shorter than what we were reading in al-Ajubah. So he's saying such as Allahumma arhamhu. So that would be, according to him, sufficient. And then there are different things that are narrated in the books of dua or supplication. Of course, they're a bit longer. I have mainly performed this funeral prayer in like 2 or 3 countries. This is mainly where I've performed the funeral prayer. And something that I've noticed is that they always perform it quite fast. And why I'm saying this is because some of these dua that exist, and I mean, I'm not reading them, as I said, you can go look in some of the books of supplication. But to be honest, I don't think you will have time to read a lot of these dua, because the way that, as I said, in my experience, it's usually prayed quite quickly. So I would start by trying to memorize one of the shorter supplications, and then you can see if you're able to memorize more and you have time, you can go ahead and read it, and Allah knows best. And then it's mentioned in Daleel that a single taslim, saying Assalamu alaikum at the end of the prayer, is sufficient. And he's using the author, Imam Mar'i al-Karmi, and tujza. He's using this word tujza, meaning it's sufficient. This is a little bit different than how, for example, it's mentioned in Muntaha al-Iradat, where he just says, just you say the taslim one time. It's a little bit more affirmative. But yes, you would normally just read the taslim one time. So then it is then permissible to pray over this deceased person for the person who's not able to attend that prayer in person, that as we've described. From the time that they're buried up to a month and some days, like a day or 2 days. And then it is haram to pray after that. So what the scenario that this is referring to is what we were mentioning earlier, is for the prayer upon someone who you're absent from them or they're absent from you. I mean, meaning there's some distance between you. So in the case that you're praying this type of prayer, and now just to let you know, this is now referring to what's in Sharh Muntaha by al-Buhooti. When you're in that situation of this prayer of the absent person, it's not then in that case a condition for the deceased to be in front of you. I mean, of course they're not in front of you because you're far away, but meaning even like in the direction, like as we said, usually that they would have to be right in front of you while you're facing the Qibla, but this is a condition that does not apply when you're praying upon the person, as we said, ghaib. They call it ghaib in Arabic. But being ghaib or not present, this doesn't apply, or we can say it's not conditioned as we condition, for example, traveling. I mean, the person need not be beyond the distance of what is required to shorten the prayer, for example, the 16 farsakh. So it's possible that they can be within that distance, but the important thing is that they were unable to pray the prayer in the same place where the person is buried. I don't mean in the graveyard, but I mean in that person's town or village before they were actually buried. So if they can't perform that prayer in their presence before they're buried, the deceased is buried, then they will pray this type of prayer, ghaib. So now that we've completed the prayer, we'll talk about carrying the person and the burial. So the carrying and the burial of the deceased, these are both fard kafaya, or the communal obligations. It is disliked to take any type of fee, like service fee or charge, some kind of fee that would be charged for either carrying the deceased or burying the deceased. Likewise, it would be also disliked to take any type of payment or fee for washing the deceased or wrapping them. Now, for those who are walking with the procession, meaning you're carrying like the body of the deceased to the graveyard, it is sunnah that the people walking will be in the front of this Janaza. And this is what's been mentioned by Ibn Mundir, and Al-Imam Ahmed's also narrated this tradition. But although it's sunnah for the people on foot walking to be in front of the Janaza, it's not disliked if they are in the back. However, for those who are on a mount, or in modern terms we might say like a vehicle, it is sunnah that they would be in the back of the Janaza. But being on a mount or on a vehicle is actually disliked when taking the body to the graveyard, unless there's some reason or excuse to do so. I mean, maybe it's an elderly person, etc. However, when returning from the graveyard, from the burial, it would not be disliked if one were to be on a mount or in a vehicle. For those in the funeral procession, it's superior to be close to the body. However, when the procession is moving through the town or the village, it is disliked to stand for the deceased, meaning if you are sitting, there's no reason to get up. It's disliked to get up. And it is disliked for one to raise one's voice, whether that be in some type of moaning or wailing, or even for reading some type of dhikr, dua, or Quran. Rather, in this case, it's actually sunnah to read any dhikr or Quran silently. And the al-Tabari mentions the practice of some people to say istaghfirullah is a bid'ah, and that that's according to Al-Imam Ahmed. He disliked it, and some scholars like Abu Hafs even declared it haram. So when it comes to the burial, it is sunnah that the grave be dug deep and wide. Not excessively wide, but just not, so narrow. And I mean, it should be deep to prevent any type of foul odor from coming. And it's also better because it keeps away any type of like scavenger animals from getting to the body. So although deep would be the sunnah, it would just be sufficient as long as that the body is protected from any type of, as we said, like scavenger animal, and that no odor is coming from it. And there's no difference in making the grave of a man or a woman. There's not like a different design for either. It is disliked to put any type of wood in the grave unless there's some necessity to do so. Likewise, anything that's been touched with fire. It is also disliked to put any type of mat underneath the body or some type of a pillow under the head. It is sunnah for the person who's putting the body in the grave to say Bismillah wa ala millati Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It is obligatory that the deceased be buried in a way that they're facing the Qibla. And it is sunnah that the deceased be laid on their right side. And the a-Taghlabi says this because it resembles the sleeping person. And it is the sunnah for the sleeping person to be on their right side. It is haram to bury more than one person in the same grave unless there's some type of necessity to do so, such as having a lot of deceased people, maybe after a war or a natural disaster, or if there just maybe aren't enough people to bury the people, or there's some type of other fear, so they need to bury them maybe quickly or all in the same place. So unless there's a reason to do so, each person should have their own individual grave. It is sunnah for everyone who's attending this burial that they should throw like 3 handfuls of the dirt onto the body, into the grave, and then at the end of the burial they should kind of make a small mound of dirt. Now regarding the grave, it is disliked to decorate it, to plaster it, to burn incense at it, to kiss it, to do tawaf around it, to lean on it, to stay a long time there, to laugh while there, or to discuss any worldly matters there. Likewise, it is disliked to sit on the grave or to step on the grave. It is disliked to build on the grave, whether that building is connected to the grave itself or is like around it. It is disliked to walk in the graveyard with sandals or footwear on, unless one has some fear of, for example, thorns or something like that. Also, extreme heat, like the ground is hot. So just pay attention. Everything what we mentioned before, including building on the grave, was disliked. However, making some type of lights in the grave or the graveyard, this is haram. It is haram to bury someone in a masjid or a place like a masjid, which would include like a madrasa or a ribat. It is haram to bury someone on land that they do not own. If someone is buried in a masjid, in a mosque, then they should be exhumed from there and moved somewhere else. Regarding the grave itself, it's sunnah to sprinkle water on the grave, and it is sunnah that the grave be raised a handspan. It is disliked to be raised more than a handspan. Writing upon the grave is also disliked. That might be a slightly different ruling now. I mean, some of these graveyards are so big, and making some type of I believe they mentioned in the fiqh books like some type of a sign, like placing a rock or something, is permissible. So inshallah, if you're writing for identification purpose, inshallah that would be okay, but generally disliked to write on the grave. And even if you're going to write, don't excessively write, and Allah knows best. Now, in the case that a woman dies and she has a fetus inside of her, I'll just summarize what they say here, but if the fetus has a sign of life, then it can be removed from the mother. I don't want to get too much into what they're writing, for example, here, because this is an old book, and maybe some of the ways to identify life have advanced quite a bit from that time. But yes, if you can identify that the child is alive, and obviously it's it can survive if you take it out, then go ahead and remove the child from the deceased mother, and Allah knows best. So it is sunnah that men visit the graves. It is disliked for women to visit the graves. And if she's going to fall into some type of a haram act, then it would be haram for her to visit the graves. Now that was the scenario of an intended visit. Were a woman just to be on her way somewhere and come up upon a grave, then she would give salams to the grave, and she can do dua for that deceased person, and that would be good, and it wouldn't be considered like the intended trip to the graveyard or the grave. And it is sunnah to read the supplication of one who visits a graveyard. So it is Assalamu alaikum dar qawmin mu'mineen insha'Allah bikum lahiqun. And there's longer versions of this, but once again, you can try to memorize this, and also memorize what's in the books of supplication. Regarding the prohibition for women to visit graves, it is clarified in Muntaha al-Iradat. The exception would be for visiting the grave of the Prophet ﷺ and his two companions, Abu Bakr and Umar radiyallahu anhuma. The kafir, the non-Muslim, should not be prevented from visiting the grave of a Muslim, and the opposite is also true, meaning it is permissible for the Muslim to visit the grave of a kafir, a non-Muslim. However, there's a slightly different adab or manners if he visits the grave of a non-Muslim. So he shouldn't send salams for him, nor should he supplicate for him. Regarding visiting the deceased hears the speech of people, meaning the living people, and he knows his visitor on Fridays before the rising of the sun. This is what Al-Imam Ahmed has said, and this is all mentioned in Muntaha al-Iradat. Shaykh al-Baz al-Ashhab, Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, he's even mentioned in al-Ghunya that the deceased knows his visitors at all times, but this time, the Friday morning before the sunrise, is the most certain time. And Al-Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he said that the hadiths and the traditions all refer to that that when a visitor comes, he is known by the one he's visiting, meaning the deceased, and that deceased hears his salams and even returns the salam to him. And this is something that's general. It's not specific to the martyrs, as some has suggested, but rather it refers to both them and other than them, as he said, general. I know some people, for whatever reason, they're sensitive for this issue. They don't like to affirm it. This is what is mentioned in our relied upon books. Our main scholars like Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Let's start with Al-Imam Ahmed, Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, Imam al-Futuhi, Imam al-Buhooti, Ibn al-Qayyim. All of them mention this. I mean, if you don't want to believe it, it's really no harm, but this is our position. This is what's mu'tamid. If you don't believe it, no problem. So going back to what's in Sharh of Daleel, yes, the one who's visiting, he should try then to visit, especially at this time, the Friday morning before the sunrise, as this is the most emphasized time for the deceased to know his visitor. He should believe in the torture of the deceased in his grave. It is sunnah, accordingly, for the visitor of the deceased person to do something to reduce that, which would be putting some type of green branches on top of the grave. Green meaning it's still like alive. Likewise, we should remember that any type of good deed that a Muslim does for another Muslim, whether he's alive or dead, and this is what a-Taghlabi is mentioning, the other person will receive that reward, meaning he's doing it with the intention of that, then he will receive the reward, even if the one is maybe ignorant of who he's doing it for. But if he's intending to do it for him, he will get the reward, and this includes things like a dua, supplication, and seeking forgiveness, as well as deeds. As we know, you can perform the Hajj on behalf of the deceased, any type of other acts one can do on behalf of other people alive and dead, and they can receive that reward. And it is mustahab, preferred, that one dedicate these good deeds to others, and it's mentioned in al-Funun that it's even mustahab or preferred to dedicate these good deeds to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Ibn Taymiyyah, the grandfather, also mentions this in al-Muharrar. So this dars was a bit long, so let's end here. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be among those who see the Jannah in their graves, that He make our graves lit, and that of all the Muslims, especially our ulama, who have tried to guide us to the straight way. O Allah, protect us from making any excessive acts with graves. Let us follow the sunnah of your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. O Allah, if we pass away, when we pass away, please take care of those that we leave behind. O Allah, forgive us for our sins and our discretions. Please forgive us and please wipe our record clean. O Allah, we ask admittance to the highest levels of Al-Jannah. We ask you that you enable us to leave things behind so that we have sadaqah jariyah that will benefit us even after our passing. O Allah, may we leave righteous spouses and children behind who will do good deeds on our behalf. O Allah, please let us die with clean hearts. May we turn to you and only to you when we are in need, for verily you are the only one that can answer our supplications. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.